Hello and welcome to DevOps Loop. My name is Sam Newman and I hope you're going to enjoy all the sessions that you're going to be seeing today. I'm going to be talking to you though about something called habitability, really thinking about how we create the right kind of experiences for the people that use the software that we create. And specifically, we're going to be focusing on the role of the platform in terms of creating a nice experience for the developers of our software. I have written books on microservices in the past, but I'm not here specifically to talk about this. I'm here more to talk about the platforms that we create to help people build microservice architectures. This is what I'm interested in talking to you about today. The platform, because the platform is all the rage. It should solve all of our issues, it should make life better for everybody, but all too often our platforms seem to collapse under their own weight. They don't quite manage to rise to the expectations placed upon them. And there are so many different ways in which people can misunderstand the role of a good platform in an organization, and it can end up just creating more mistrust, more silos, and slowing everybody down under the weight of ever increasingly complicated software. I want to start with this concept of habitability. I first encountered this in the context of talking about source code, and I was introduced this term by Frank Bushman, who was the chief architect at Siemens. And Frank Bushman would talk about the idea that when you make a technical decision about how something should be done, that you do have a duty of care to make sure that the people that live with those decisions are going to have a good time. I think the first definition of habitability I found was from Richard Gabriel, who said that habitability is the characteristic of source code that enables programmers coming to the code later in its life to understand its construction and to change it comfortably and confidently. Now, of course, we're not talking about source code habitability. We're talking about this in the larger term. But there is this notion that we live in these systems, that decisions made by other people have a huge bearing on how we live and breathe our daily lives, which after all make up such a big chunk of the lives we live in. We want to go to work being happy. We want to go to work feeling that we're going to be productive. And so there, when we're making decisions, deciding what people can or cannot do, it's beholden upon us to make people's lives a little bit easier. And look, if we make people's lives a little bit easier, they're going to be more productive. They're going to get more work done. They're going to be happier. They're going to want to stay. Their friends, their colleagues will want to come and join them from other organizations. So this is not just about some hippie drum circle stuff. This is just about recognizing that people, after all, are who builds our technology. And it makes sense for us to create environments in which they want to work. I mentioned architects earlier. And in the context of IT, we have these people called architects who design our systems. And, you know, they don't always work so well when they're off in some kind of ivory tower, divorced from the work being done. The term architect actually sits a little uneasily on us when we think about how we want architects to behave in the context of software. We sort of have this image of architects of the built environment, you know, having a top-down plan, assuming everything should be done in a certain way. In reality, when we start looking at architects of the built environment, they didn't work like this. They don't work like this, or at least the good ones don't. Mies van der Rohe is one of the most famous architects of all time. One of the things he's most famous for is pioneering the modern skyscraper. He came up with this concept as part of implementing what he described as being the concept of universal space. Recognizing that the buildings that he would help create, he couldn't possibly envisage all the different ways in which they might be used. So he wanted to create a mechanisms within his designs by which the building's use could evolve and change over time. This concept of a central core, which was the main structural component of the building, which provided all the core services through a central, sort of pillar almost, would then allow the space around that to be reconfigured in different ways. So his job was to design a building which was aesthetically pleasing, but delivered the core services to people, but then allowed them to change how that space was used. And I think software architects have got the hang of this now, I hope, that there isn't some top-down design that we all have to follow. But it feels like we're often missing this a bit when it comes to creating the tools and the platforms for our developers. We assume we can know the answers to how these things will want to be used and that we can almost lock things down and restrict things. And in reality, no, we can't. The platform should be about providing those core services to our developers to let them use them how they need to, and in some cases, allowing them not to use the platform at all. We live, after all, in an age of shift left. We're pulling more and more things to the left, and where is the left? That's it, the poor developer, who now thinks they have to know everything there is to know about database administration, test automation, security concerns, and everything else, and they're becoming overburdened. We have kind of awesome work like the wonderful book Team Topologies, which is giving us a model for how more modern and efficient IT organizations structure themselves. They introduce in this book the concept of the stream-aligned teams, these long-lived, product-oriented teams focused on delivery on streams of valuable work. These teams that have sort of more autonomy, that can make decisions for themselves, who have full ownership over those assets. And this is why kind of microservices come in. Teams can own and operate these microservices and deploy them and operate with all this autonomy. And isn't it going to be great? But oh my word, aren't there more and more things we're expecting these teams to do to operate in these environments? More and more and more things that they have to worry about. But it's okay, because we've got a platform. And what I want to share with you today are some of the things that work and don't work around platforms, some of the pitfalls that I've seen, and some of the maybe lessons that you can take to heart to create platforms that really are habitable for the people that live within them. So hopefully these are going to be some concrete pitfalls to avoid and some concrete tips that you can take on board in terms of how your own platform is going to change and evolve over time, in terms of how you think about its role within your own organization. I'm based here in the UK. I live in the south, which is theoretically supposed to be a sunnier place than the rest of the UK. And a couple of years ago, I went up to the north of England, which looks pretty much like this, to meet a company. And I do these research visits from time to time, learning how different teams and companies operate. And I was chatting to the developers at this organization and saying, so what kind of changes would you like to see happening in your organization that would make your lives a little bit easier? And they said to me, well, Sam, what I'd like to use the cloud. We'd like to be using some kind of public cloud vendor so that we can spin things up as we need. And I spoke to the boss and I said, hello, boss. This idea of your developers wanting to use the public cloud, it seems to say, what are your plans around this? Are you planning to maybe give them access to the public cloud? And he said, no, Sam. We already have the public cloud. This confused me somewhat. I went back to the developers. And developers, you're already using the public cloud. In this particular company's case, they're using AWS. And they were surprised by this. So I dug a bit deeper and I found out how they were using AWS. So what happened was there was indeed AWS being used to provide all the core infrastructure for these particular organizations. And so when a developer needed something, they wanted to spin up maybe a virtual machine or, just so they can deploy their software, the way they would do this is they would be asked to write a ticket in Jira. The Jira ticket was then picked up by the sysadmins of this particular organization, who would then open up the AWS console, click a few buttons, and hey presto, there's your cloud resources. And this is true and disturbing and is kind of the equivalent of buying a supercar and then putting a wheel clamp on it. I still scratch my head about what's going on here, but it's hard. They've taken the cloud and removed from it one of the most important aspects. This is the first pitfall I see around a lot of people's use of both the cloud and platforms in general, is not really embracing the concept of self-service. We want these teams focused on delivery, these streamlined teams focused on delivering valuable software to the users. They want to be able to go fast. We need to enable them to do this. One of the key ways to enable our developers to go fast and get things done is to help them. Let them make the decisions they need to make. Let them do the work they need to do. When we think about AWS, when it first came on the scene back in, 2006, really most of us didn't start really paying attention until about 2008, let's be honest. Its killer feature, when you cut through all the hype about renting a computer, was all about supporting self-service. It was the API. The issue was to give people access to that API, to let people do that self-service. You have to actually trust your people. When you get to the heart of why people aren't allowing for self-service, it is because of this lack of trust. Speaking of AWS, around 2009, the company I was at the time, we were doing some work with AWS around various different things. And we were chatting, a colleague of mine, to one of the product owners there, and talking about sort of how they saw the products and how they're kind of marketing it effectively. And at the time, this particular product owner said, well, we sort of view AWS as being like a utility, right? We are just a utility. We sell electricity. So we're just going to provide these cloud services to people. We're not overly worried about how they use them. That's up to them, right? We're just a utility. And my colleague, Nick Hines, said something very clever at the time, which was, it's all very well saying that you're a utility, but what we can see is a lot of your customers are getting electrocuted. There is the thing that you can provide people these self-service features, and that's great, but you do still have a duty of care to make sure that people aren't being electrocuted. Coming back to this concept of habitability, we want to give you an empowered space in which to work, but not necessarily a dangerous place in which to do work. This is the other big thing here, right? You might provide all the coolest tools you have, but your job is not to provide cool tools, really. Your job, if you're somebody working inside a platform team, it is to enable other people to do their job. And if you think the best way to do that is by giving them tools and platforms, whatever else, you also have a responsibility to help people use them. And I see this time and time again. The platform team feels that its job is to create a platform. And they sit in their silo talking about Kubernetes clusters and spend zero time actually working with the teams using these platforms to understand what it is that they need. The job of the platform team should not be about building a platform. It should be about enablement. It's for this very reason I don't actually like calling teams a platform team. It's better to call the team that might, as part of their mission statement, own the platform, but call them the delivery enablement team or developer services. Make it about helping people. Make the mission about helping people. Don't make the mission of the platform team owning the platform. Does your platform team do outreach? Do they go spend time with other teams? Do they provide training? Do they understand how the platform is being used to better improve that platform to enable people to get things done? That's why these platforms should exist. If you're not doing this, your platform just becomes yet another silo in your organization, albeit a really expensive silo. So here's another top tip. Treat your microservice platform just like you treat any other sort of type of product development. Have a product owner for it. A product owner who's thinking about who are our users, what are their needs, how can we suit those needs, how can we understand what they want. If you take a product-oriented mindset into how you think about the platforms that you create, you're going to create things which are better and easier to use for people, that are more habitable. Think about the core services that you need to provide, and think about the space that you need to leave for developers to use that platform in the different ways they need to solve the problem in front of them. Let's be honest now. When we're talking about platforms, we're typically here talking about things based on the Kubernetes ecosystem. And look, it's a bewildering place to be. Now, yes, I'm sure part of the way you can solve this problem is to hire some very expensive consultants to help you pick which tools you want. And maybe that's part of your own platform journey. But you can't necessarily expose all of this to your developers either. It's a confusing enough world as it is. It is therefore appropriate for you as somebody who's providing a platform to your developers, which might be something as simple as here's a public cloud account, or here's a Kubernetes cluster with some add-ons, to provide something of a curated experience. It's okay to say, put guardrails up. These are the things that we think work really well. These are the things that are going to solve most of the problems we see in our organization, or at least a lot of the problems in our organization. Keeping things simple is okay. You're going to have to spend some time working out the right level of abstraction for different people. And different people in your organization may need more power and less power. Guess what? It's your job to work that out. It may not be appropriate for you to provide a one-size-fits-all for all people inside your organization. And this then takes us on to a knotty, difficult challenge that I see around this. And this is the G word, governance. And governance is often seen as a very scary concept. In reality, I think it's a necessary evil in most cases. And even then, I don't really think it's evil. Governance really, at least the way I think about it, is deciding that things should be done in a certain way and making sure they are done in a certain way and updating how things should be done as you learn more. That's all governance is. And in a small team, you just do this implicitly without thinking about it. In larger organizations, this needs to be a bit more of an overt activity. You may be thinking about, legislative environments you're operating in and restrictions that might be placed upon you. Or, but this is ultimately, governance is often required, is always required in some way, shape or form. However, in many organizations, especially those that are scared by the concept of giving delivery teams more autonomy, they see the platform and they see their traditional role in terms of top-down governance, which is often viewed as a way of saying no to as many things as possible, and they've come up with a solution. And they start trying to do governance through tooling. They try and enforce how things should be done through the platform. And there's a massive issue with this idea. The moment you start saying the way we're going to implement our governance regime is through our platform, this next thing follows. A decision that you must use the platform. If this platform only lets you do the things you're allowed to do, we need to make sure you only use the platform, otherwise it might be too dangerous. Again, it comes back to trust, but this happens over and over again. If you're forcing people to use your platform, it isn't about enablement. It is about control. It's about restriction. And that's not a good way to go. This is like pretending that shadow IT doesn't exist. You must use the platform and only the platform. Are they going to keep doing that, do you reckon? If you say you can only use the platform and that's all that you can do, when people start finding other ways to solve problems, they know they'll get in trouble, so they won't tell you. Forcing people to use your platform is a brilliant way for you to completely miss all the shadow IT that's knocking around inside your organization. And this is a growing thing. You can't put the genie back in the bottle when it comes to end user provisioned software services. These things exist now, they are out there. If you make it hard for people to do their jobs, the good people will either bypass those controls or they'll leave. And if they're bypassing those controls and you don't know about it, then you're denying yourself the ability to update the platform to help solve those problems. When it comes to governance, there's a good role in being clear about why things need to be done in a certain way and why those choices are being made. And then trusting your people to do the right things. But you can also make it as easy to do the right things as possible. This comes back to the concept of the paved road metaphor. There's a destination out there, and we're going to provide a road that we think will get you there as easily as possible. But we recognize that there may be other paths you might need to take, and those aren't paved. We can't pave all of them for you. But look, if you stick to this paved road, it's going to be okay. Providing that paved road experience is about providing the guardrails to help people do the right thing, but recognizing that they might need to do something that you didn't expect because you can't see the future any more than Mies van der Rohe could understand exactly how his buildings were going to be used many years after his death, but he created space in which they could be used in different ways. You see this example in tools that I've come across quite frequently. There's a lovely example from the Financial Times. They have a system called BizOps there, which is going to ostensibly is like almost like a service registry, but it gives you information about the different services available within the Financial Times. But there's this lovely aspect around it, which it tells you what things that you should be doing as a service owner. It says, well, look, you should be doing this, you should be doing that. And if you're not doing those things and it detects you're not doing those things, it gives you links. So you can follow and understand what it is you're supposed to be doing, or gives you information about how to fix it. So it shows you what you should do, explains why, and gives you links to places to fix those issues if you need to. This is a tool which helps you, not hinders you. And this brings us on to perhaps the most controversial aspect of all of this. You need to make the platform optional. And this is something that many people balk at. They spent millions of dollars building a pristine platform, and they want people to use it. And one of the best ways to make sure that people use it is to force them to use it. Thou shalt use the platform. It's not great to do that. It feels attractive. especially if you know the platform makes it easy to do the right thing. Well, if you must use the platform then because you're going to be safe. It's amazing what happens once you make people use the platform and force them to use the platform. The people who own the platform are no longer incentivized to make the platform easy to use. And that's a huge issue. This is a problem, right? If you're a platform owner, this exists to make people's lives easier, to enable people. We therefore need to be thinking about how can we make people's lives easier to work with. If the platform is optional, you're going to track how many people are using the platform and how many people aren't. If people aren't using the platform, it's going to be in your best interest as a platform owner to go find out why. Otherwise, people will quite rightly be asking questions like, why did we spend tens of millions of dollars on this Kubernetes cluster? This is going to be all the incentive you need to go out and do the outreach. What is it that we need to do to support you in using our tool? Maybe it's just too daunting to move on board. Maybe you don't provide some key services they need. But by making this platform optional, and this is a scary concept, I understand it, but by making this optional, you're going to create an environment in which you are seen as well as the platform, not as being something I have to use, not as a burden, but a blessing. Oh, look, if I do this, all of these wonderful things happen for me. The heavens will open and the sky will shine down upon me. And, it's like you're sort of playing hard to get in a way. Oh, well, I see you struggling over there. Well, I've got a platform you might want to use, and I think you'll enjoy it. And then with those people who can't work on your platform, maybe because they're doing something quite different. You might have use cases in your organization that don't fit what you're trying to do. And actually, that's okay. If there are really legitimate solutions that you couldn't possibly encompass in your platform, then you say, fine, you do your thing. Or perhaps this becomes input to your business case to change what your platform is able to do. Different teams will need different things in your system. Large enterprise organizations will have software in all kinds of different stages of evolution. So having one size fits all in that environment doesn't make sense either. Remember, this is what we talk about, this thing being a paved road. The idea here is that we're trying to provide guardrails for you. We're trying to make the developers, give them the tools that they need to do their job and to do their job well. But we recognize that there may be other ways to get where you need to go. This path looks good, but it looks like it's maybe going in the wrong direction for me. Well, I can cut through those hedgerows there, and yes, it's going to take me more work. I'm going to have to do that work myself, and I recognize that, but actually, I can justify that. Well, go forth and do it. A good platform owner, I think, when you start seeing people drift off your platform, would ask them why, and maybe get some tips about how you can improve things going forward. It's a paved road. It's not a railway track. Just to summarize, because I don't want to keep you overly long, you've all got platforms to build and developers to enable. When we're thinking about some of the key pitfalls that I see over and over again, when thinking about these platforms that we create to help people, here are the biggest pitfalls I see. The first one is not really properly enabling a culture of self-service. Next, it's not helping people use the tools well. You can't just turn up with this huge tech stacks and assume that people are going to get on board with it. The process of onboarding people, helping them use it, is really important. And you can't view that in a transactional mechanism either. That's going to be ongoing support and help and guidance. And ideally, your people building your platform should be embedding themselves in the teams and going through this experience with those teams as well, because that's going to be valuable feedback. Again, if you're viewing this as a product owner, you're going to want to make sure the product that you create gets used by people. And again, that product mindset is going to help you greatly here. Finally, the really nasty pitfall is avoid this temptation to implement all of your governance through tooling, because that can lead to so many bad behaviors. But hopefully I've given you lots more tips and pitfalls. I'm trying to be more optimistic. It's quite hard for me being British. I'm naturally cynical, but I want to give you more good things to do than bad. Trust your people. Recognize that a lot of the constraints you place about what people do is often down to a lack of trust. If you really want to build an organization which has these autonomous teams where people can make decisions and go fast, I don't know how you're going to make that work without maybe trusting people a bit more. Treat your platform like a product. The users, your developers, your testers, everybody else who uses that platform, they are your users. Building a building without considering the needs of the people who are going to be using it is just as insane as building a platform without thinking about the people that want to use it. You don't inflict a platform on people. You build a platform for people. Don't be tempted to give too much of a kind of messy experience to people. Yes, there's all sorts of things you can do with Kubernetes, but it might be appropriate for you to provide a more curated experience. Some organizations, for example, may well want to run things like, say, Cloud Foundry, which gives you a more highly level abstraction over some of the online cloud services. Other teams might be happier saying, well, actually, I want to work directly at the level of managing my own pods. You've got to pick the right level of curation for the teams that you've got and the problems that they're trying to solve. Through this all, what you're trying to provide here is the paved road, not the railroad track. Allow people to find their way. Make that path as smooth and as easy as possible. And maybe initially what you're going to be doing is solving the sort of lowest common denominator issues, and that's okay. But make the platform optional, and that will keep you honest. That will close the loop on your decision making. That will make it so much easier for you to remain focused on the goal of making people's lives easier. People are leaving the platform because it's not easy to use. Well, maybe you've got to improve the platform, or maybe they're better off that platform. The platform doesn't exist for the platform's sake. If it's not useful, you don't need it. If you're distilling it all down, though, I think it all comes from trusting your people. Your software is a socio-technical system. It's technology and people and humans. If we don't trust the humans, we can't expect them to build the software well. And if we build platforms that don't really focus on the people above all else, we're kind of doomed to fail. I hope this has been useful, and I hope you enjoy all the other talks at DevOps Loop. I will be watching from home as well. If you want to know any more information about the work that I do, my books are out there on the internet, and there's information over my website about the consultancy work I do and everything else, and you can find lots of talks by me where I'm often more ranty than this. But I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.